and we're live on Facebook. Over to you, Charles Appleby.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. A very big welcome to everyone. This is the 10th of our 1.5 Max webinars about action on global warming. Going back to January, on our webinar then, we said we wanted 1.5 degrees max, and that seemed a long way away now. So now we're just over 2 weeks to go to COP26. So will world leaders make the commitment to 1.5 degrees? So today we're going to hear from 5 amazing young speakers who are going to give us their views. Young people seem to feel left out on climate, so it's great that we're able to provide a platform for these people, and we really appreciate having such climate expert young people here with us today. So for everybody, they're going to share with us their final pleas to COP26. But let's start off with the introductions. So my name is Charles Appleby. I'm the founder of noco2.org. So many people wanting what to do about global warming. So we make it easy. By planting lots of trees, you can remove your carbon footprint. So to date, we've planted 450,000 trees and created 4,500 days of paid work. So this webinar is all voluntary. Everyone's volunteered. So if you would like to contribute, the webinar is sponsored by noco2. So if you'd like to donate, we can plant some trees for you. So for just £20, we'll plant 180 trees, and for £30, we'll plant 270 trees. Okay, so introductions. Gary, first of all, big thanks to Gary Kasulu. Gary's the founder of Loving Social Media, and it's only because of Gary that these webinars are possible. So huge thank you.
It's so
Gary.
Not true. It's Charles's energy and his tenacity, and he never gives up, and he's never given up. And I really, I take my hat off to you, Charles. It's my pleasure to be involved in this. So I think all the credit goes your way, sir.
Thanks, Gary. Okay, so we've got a big team today from Columbia University, New York, Masters in Environmental Science and Policy. So huge thank you to Deanna for pulling all that together. So we've got Deanna, we've got Blake from the US, we've got Shrishti, who's originally from India, we've got Chandana, also from India. Really pleased to have contingent from India. So we've had nearly 100 speakers on these webinars over the year, and it's the first time we've had people from India. So very, very welcome to put over your point of view. And then we've got Leah, who's from Germany and is now studying in Edinburgh. So over to you to give an introduction to yourselves. So where should we start? Deanna, would you like to start?
Great. So I'm Deanna. As Charles introduced, I'm from Columbia University with 4 others on the call studying environmental science and policy. I've done a lot of work in strategy creation at the University of St. Andrews, where my undergraduate was, and I'm hoping to continue in strategy creation, especially with an emphasis on the circular economy. So
Blake, what about yourself?
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone. My name is Blake. I'm also in the Master's in Public Administration in Environmental Science and Policy at Columbia University, along with Deanna, Shrishti, and Chandana. My previous experience is product management, strategy, and finance, primarily actually in the aerospace business. Nature and sustainability have been sort of my passion all along. And so now I'm in this program to make a switch. After this program, I look to go into probably the sustainability consulting with a focus on local policy.
Great. So you've had a great start with working in aerospace and interest in nature. So superb. Thank you for that. Shrishti.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Shrishti Mahajan. Like Charles said, I'm from India. Academically, I'm trained as a renewable energy engineer, and I'm a social impact practitioner. I've been working at the intersection of clean energy and improved health education and livelihood outcomes. I'm super excited to give my 2 Ps to our very sweet decision makers who'll be convening in 2 weeks from now, and excited to speak to all of you. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that. So over to Chandana.
Thanks, Charles. Hi, everyone. I'm Chandana, and like mentioned earlier, I'm again from the MPA ESP program at Columbia, and I'm originally from India and have a year's experience in corporate sustainability. But going forward, I would love to have some part in policy analysis at a nonprofit. So excited to be here and speak to all of you.
Great. Okay. So, Leah, yourself.
Hello, everyone. And yeah, thank you for having me again. My name is Leah. I'm doing my master's at the moment in climate law. Originally came from more of like a also more policy environmental background with regards to looking at international relations, sustainable development at the University of St. Andrews. That's how Diana and I know each other, because we're working together with the University Environmental Sustainability Board to set up a strategy for net zero emissions. But now looking really into more of the litigation side of climate change. Who knows, maybe one day I'll take governments to court for not obliging to their carbon commitments, but I'm not really sure yet. We'll see where I'm heading with regards to my future, but really just passionate about anything to do with environmental action and pushing for ambitious change and system change that our world needs.
Great. So talking about taking the government to court. So Gary, if you remember, Georgia, who's a little bit older than you, Leah, who was on our webinar 2 months ago, she was in court just this last week, taking the British government to court over its implementation of the ETS system. So it must put you guys together. So big welcome to everyone in our audience, particularly to Martin, great to see you again. Michael, great to see you as a newcomer here, and Paul, very big welcome to everybody. Oh, and to Ivor, I see, people I know. If you have any questions, do please pop questions in the chat, and we'll see if we can get to the questions. But to get things moving and to set the scene, let's ask this question to start off with. So we're looking really just for short answers here rather than long answers. So really the question is, how are you feeling about COP26? Are you worried about the outcome? Or like John Kerry last week, are you upbeat? So Shrishti, would you like to have a go at that one first?
Yeah, I just want to say I'm definitely feeling pumped up about this meet. I think after the world has faced a pandemic like COVID-19, I assume empathy in the world leaders, and I hope that their eyes have opened up to the fact that environmental damage is not singular. It affects each one of us. It needs the efforts of each and every country that is being represented at COP26. And I hope that they would not disappoint us this time. Yeah.
Great answer. Thank you so much. Deanna, what about yourself?
I think I'm nervous purely because I really want to see the decision makers make a change from last time. So we've had so many empty promises before, and I think there's so much hope riding on COP26 that this will be the great change. This is what we need. But what I'm worried is that I think we should stop looking at COP26 as a final destination. Like, it shouldn't be where our problems end. And this is actually the start of a race. Like, this is the race plan that you put together before a marathon or a sprint. So I think that I just really want to make sure that that is carried out, and that world leaders are understanding that this isn't the end. This is actually the very, very beginning, and that they carry through on that.
Certainly, there's a concern I've got is there's been a lot of raised expectation about COP26, and that's a concern for us all. But anyway, Blake, what's your answer?
To be honest, I'm hopeful at the opportunity that this presents, but I am hesitant anytime world leaders get together to make commitments. What I'm more focused on is not so much what comes directly out of COP26, but more so on the actions that follow immediately after COP26. What I do find exciting is that the ethos that is surrounding this event, given the pandemic, the economics surrounding renewable energy, I think there's a lot of excitement that can garner some fantastic actions, but I'll just be interested to see what actually comes following the event.
I think a lot of people are interested in what's going to happen following the event. Absolutely. Great. So Srishti, oh, sorry, hang on. We're on to Leah. Sorry, apologies for that. Leah, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a mix, really. I think it's really a hopeful time to see just so much come together in our world community. There's a lot of pressure on this COP, and I think world leaders do know this. They should definitely know this. With a lot of eyes that are watching this process, a lot of people say that this is really our last chance, especially if we want to meet the 1.5 target. So I think that pressure does make will make for a very interesting discussion, and world leaders will not be easily let off the hook, I think. So I think that's hopeful, because this civil society and the people are really pushing for this, and I think that's it's we the people that are pushing for, and that are through that creating that change, and I think that's super hopeful. But of course it's also a scary time. It's something really worrying, because if it's a meeting that is so important, especially after the pandemic, and with regards to, well, how are we actually going to move action forward? And yeah, this is also, it's a lot of pressure, and it's a tense time for us to decide how this is going to look in the future, and what sort of decisions are taken from COP, but also what actions are taken from it.
Super. Last chance, I think, sums up the thoughts of a lot of people. So again, just to get the discussion moving, set the context, let's ask another question for a short answer, please. So people are saying to me very often, they're saying, well, what about other countries? What are other countries doing? So I mean, often I'm talking to people in the UK and they're saying, well, what are other countries doing? So we've got this amazing international group today. So I'd be really, really keen to have your view on what your original country is doing. So is it doing enough? And is it doing enough? What else should it be doing? So let's start off with you, Blake. So the US, the world's biggest emitter of CO2 per person. Okay, so what do you think? What do you think of what the US is doing?
Never enough, first of all. I always just leave with that. But I think the actions that we're seeing by the Biden administration is, again, headed in the right direction. Now, there are a lot of politics that are going to come into play when you look at the reconciliation bill and the infrastructure bill that's slowly making its way through Congress. And I think this, again, goes back to my earlier point of I'm liking the actions that I'm seeing, but I'm waiting to understand if they come to fruition. So if we can get these bills passed, then part of me will be satisfied, but then the next part of me is saying, okay, now what next?
Okay. And the US politics, do you think the bills are going to get through in some usable way?
I think in some capacity, yes, they will. Okay.
So Deanna, you're in the US but from the UK. So let's ask you your thoughts on both the US and the UK. What do you think of this?
In terms of the US, I agree with everything that Blake says. I think I probably do not have a great position to comment on. I don't like commenting on other countries' politics, but I do think that as a global superpower, they should be the example. They should be the ones making the biggest changes, because you know what the US does, everyone else kind of follows through after a couple of years. So I'd like to see greater change in, putting their actions where their promises are. In terms of the UK, I think I'm quite proud of them. I mean, they were the first major economy to make a legally binding commitment to achieve net zero by 2050. They announced they'd stop selling new petrol, diesel cars by 2030, which means that they're the fastest G7 country to decarbonize cars and vans. But at the same time, are these fast enough? Are they drastic enough? I don't think so. So, hopefully they'll be able, COP26 will really sort of energize them to make these changes quicker and at a much bigger scale.
So thank you. Yeah, absolutely. The US should be an example. That's a really, really good point. So Leah, you cover both the UK and Germany, Europe, whatever. Do you want to cover would you like to cover both of those for us, please?
Yeah, sure. I think just following on from what Deanna said with the UK, yeah, I think I get frustrated when things like things that are currently happening, for example, like the Cambo oil field, and new commitments to oil and renewables, not renewables, rather than like fossil fuels rather than renewables, especially at a time like this when on the one hand actions and words are being said, and the other still other things are still being done. And I think that is something that, despite obviously UK being hailed often as a leader and calling itself a leader, is just frustrating to see. And I think there's definitely more action that is needed on that side to actually line up promises with the actions taken. So I think that is something that is definitely important to watch out for. Regarding Germany and why the EU, because Germany negotiates together with the whole block of the EU when it comes to the global agreements. I mean, yeah, also I think obviously the EU is a great push, always been a great push on international environmental agreements, that is for sure, but there's still so much to do as well. There's still so much that needs to progress, especially more specific. I know Germany is such a rich country. I think there's still so much more that it needs to push to turn its economy around to make it more make it carbon neutral. And I think we're not really seeing that yet. We're definitely seeing people talk about it, but the ambition does need to raise, because just like with the US, we know if Europe does need to lead on this and push for action on this. I think it's not quite as the ambitious leader as it could be. So hopefully we can see some of that ambition increase.
Okay, thanks for that. So thank you, Leah, for raising the Cambo oil field. So I've got a super question lined up later, not about that, but about Norway. So that's just a preview to you guys of what's coming up. But for now, let's finish off the country summary. Shrishti, what would you say about India?
I'm going to take a side first, because India is a huge country, and I do not think a few comments of mine would represent my entire nation, but I'll try. To begin with, I think India, first of all, emits 7% of the global emissions. So that's pretty less in percentage, but considering a population of 1.3 billion, our per capita average emission is still very low in the country. Having said that, we are an emerging economy. We have issues of poverty. We have issues of hunger still that the country is struggling with. We are still instituting governance structures that would help us manage people in all honesty and their issues on an everyday basis. And amidst those issues, when we have to evolve the narrative of climate change and environmental damage in a country like India, I think it becomes all the more difficult to set the tone right. With that, our current administration is doing a brilliant job at ensuring that we leverage the 300 sunny days that India receives on an annual basis, and we capitalize on the natural resource that we have through programs like National Solar Mission, which is our capstone project, so to say, which is being run in phases. And as per as I remember, we've already achieved 100 gigawatts of renewable energy in the country, which is a big boost to the morale of not only young people like us, but also the private sector, who are working indefinitely to install these clean energy systems. And lastly, one of the points that remained when I was working on ground is, how do I use the clean energy transition to enable better health and education outcomes for the rural people living in the country? We're precisely 80% agriculture based, we are an agrarian economy. We do not want people to shift their gaze vocationally. So how do I ensure that we're using clean electricity to make agriculture more clean, to involve the rural workforce into this just clean energy transition? And most recently, and I would just want to state in one sentence, we came out with this draft policy framework that I was a part of, which was called Developing and Promoting Decentralized Renewable Energy-Based Livelihood Applications. So this is a big step for our country to amalgamate both livelihoods and renewable energy. And we do have a long way to go, but we're going stronger day by day on this.
Okay, well, let's ask Chandana to comment next before we have any follow-up questions on that. Chandana.
Yeah, thank you. So I would firstly echo everything that Srishti said and would just comment that first of all, India being having a massive population, first of all, is doing comparatively well compared to some other countries in the world. But at the same time, there's a lot to improve. Like just like Srishti said, while we're tackling public health crisis, basic sanitation requirements in the country, we're also trying to deal with climate action. So that is a very important thing to keep in mind. And when, like she also mentioned, we just reached a renewable energy capacity of 100 gigawatts just in August of this year. And the country aims to have a 450 gigawatt capacity by 2030, which is a very good target, which is just 9 years down the line. And that seems to sort of say how ambitious the country is getting with each passing year. Another important idea to keep in mind is the impact of COVID as well, because I think even the entire country, especially in the corporate sector, I think the pandemic has made a massive impact. So just before I joined this course, I was in the corporate field and I could really see the impact of the pandemic on the management and the investors who are very much ingrained in the corporate sustainability area. This is because people are seeing that investing in sustainability is the way ahead, which is very positive to see. And India actually, just a few months back, the Securities and Exchange Board of India made it mandatory that the top 100 or 1,000 listed entities actually report their sustainability reporting along with their business responsibility report. And it's going to be mandatory from the year of 2022 and 2023, but it's voluntary for this year. So I think that's a big change because people were only giving voluntary reporting with GRI or any other such reporting. But then now that it's becoming mandatory, so you see that shift in every tier, right? So I think there is a lot of progress being made. And when it also comes to this COP26, I think we have to hope that there are more ambitious targets because there's a lot of scope, I think, in India when it comes to moving towards carbon neutrality and everything, but then there's also a barrier in implementation. So I think as we move forward with a positive outlook and management, I think we will be able to
while we've got you both here, I think a lot of people in Europe will be very interested in just a quick answer to this question. So for India, between the two of you, basically net zero 2050 for India, is that possible and is it fair? Who wants to have a go at that?
Who defines fair, first of all?
Well, you're answering the question. You define fair. The whole world's supposed to be going to net zero in 2050. So is it possible to achieve it? Or are you going to plead an exception? And if so, why?
Okay. I was a part of this study, which did forecasting and modeling of how long can India survive with using fossil fuels as their primary source of energy. And it will be until 2060 that we will still be using coal and petroleum as one of our sources of energy generation, but by the time 2050 comes, the percentage of renewable energy that our country would be generating would be close to 80%.
Okay.
So when I speak of net neutrality for India, it is not just power generation, it is also energy efficiency, it is also the electricity that we would use, so forth, in our electric vehicles. It is also our cooking habits changing from using fuel and LPG to using electricity, which still remains underscored in many of our conversations when we talk about clean energy transition. So I feel I would not want to have a negative approach, but it is a difficult terrain to be net neutral by 2050. Yeah.
Okay. So Chandana, what do you think?
Yeah. So yeah, like mentioned earlier, it is difficult, but I think I would remain optimistic and try to see what the steps are that can be taken to achieve this, because I think on the ground, the investing and the efforts for sustainability is seen. Actually, I think compared to even a couple of years ago or even 3-4 years ago, I see that change on the ground. So we could be optimistic, but also make practical efforts for that. So we'll see.
Okay. So what I heard from Shrishti was that you reckon that you can be 80% clear of fossil fuels by 2050, but that net zero might be 2060. But on the other hand, there might still be possibilities to accelerate that. So it may be possible to achieve better on that. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Right. So let's get down to the heart of the meeting then. So subject today obviously is final pleas for people and planet. Okay, so we've had 9 webinars so far this year. We started in the 15th of January with what people want at COP26. Very, very important this year, I think, was Earth Day, Joe Biden's summit. And for me, that was really the day when the world actually decided it wanted to stop global warming. I think for me, there'd been a lot of toing and froing before that, but I felt that there was a real big decision made on that day. And then that was followed up. We met on the 15th of June and we talked about the G7. And the G7 actually made the commitment to keep 1.5 degrees in reach. So now, just a couple of weeks or so to go to COP26, over to yourselves to make your final pleas to people and planet. So let's start off then with Shrishti. Shrishti, what would you have to say? What's your plea?
Yeah, sorry, my laptop was making crazy noises. Okay, I'm very excited for this and I hope nobody gets offended. Okay, hi everyone. Today I speak directly to our dear decision makers who will convene in exactly 2 weeks from now. We are at a tipping point in our lives and we have a long way to go, longer than any one of our decision makers who would be representing us at COP26 in 2 weeks. Hence, I demand acceptance, accountability, and action. Acceptance by polluters, accountability by nation states to ensure just energy transition to protect vulnerable communities, and action not through just mere intentions, but through investments, through installations of clean energy systems, because we know that is the only way to go. Coal will phase out, fossils will phase out. We have no chance other than taking help of renewable energy systems. The reality is we are not on track. We are not on track to limit our warming to well below 2 degrees, let alone 1.5 degrees. Time has gone to just talk about it. Time is running fast to act on it. So I sincerely want to call upon oil and gas industries, nation actors, non-nation actors, emerging economies to switch gears, to embrace the change, our economies will endure, and collaborate to protect the planet. And I just want to remind everyone, there is no second chance this time. COP26 is going to be the defining moment in our history, and people of future generation are going to look back at us, at you and me, at people representing this planet, what we did now. We are creating history. So please, dear decision makers, world leaders, pick our planet. Do not pick Mars right now. It's not going to help you. Thank you.
Wow, Srishti, thank you so much. No second chance. Deanna, how are you going to follow that?
I was literally about to say I cannot follow it in the same way.
Someone has to. You can.
What I would like to start off by saying is that there seems to be no amount of pleas that will move our politicians further in making systemic changes that can combat the climate future. So the Queen earlier this week was reported to be irritated by the people who talk and don't do. Greta Thunberg at the Youthful Summit made her infamous blah, blah, blah speech. And if the Queen's words don't call for action by governments or climate leaders, or even the science, which is incredibly reliable now, if that is not making us move forward, then what will? And so I think I'd want to ask politicians directly, and it's, what will motivate you? The Queen has spoken, the climate leaders have spoken, the science has spoken. So what is it that you need to make these changes? And I think second, what I really want to see as well is actually inspired by one of my professors here. He said he has a rule of thumb for sustainability, and that's what gets measured gets done, which I think actually speaks volumes for the upcoming conference. So my suggestion and plea, I think, also to world leaders at this conference would be for shorter and attainable targets in national changes, and targets also in personal attitudes, so that politicians can lead by example and they can show us what to do.
Wow. So no amount of pleas. And you're a negotiator here, Deanna. What will motivate you? Asking them what will motivate them. That's a really, really great idea. Okay, so Blake, I think it's you next.
Yeah, so I have to be honest, I had the same idea as Deanna. As we've talked so much, and at this point, you just want to ask, like, what can we possibly do? But I want to take a slightly different approach because, in my view, COP26 is one of the last remaining opportunities for our nations to shift the narrative of humanity from depletion to revitalization, to recognizing from what we can take to what we can give, to what we can consume individually to what we can nurture collectively. And I think this is this opportunity to realize that we do not exist from the rest of the natural world. We're part of a large, complex, interconnected global ecosystem, and we have to begin acting accordingly. We must stop acting based on the ideas of unlimited growth and competition, and instead move with a purpose of revitalization and compassion. We just have to recognize that really there's this inherent partnership between ourselves and the natural surroundings. The greater the health of these natural systems, the greater our collective flourishing will be. Nature aims to create mutually beneficial relationships. So why continue destroying it? It doesn't make sense. If you think about what New York's done with the 1 Million Trees initiative, they've expanded their urban forest by 20%. And along this, the city benefited, right? They're seeing increased carbon storage. Right now, the urban forest captures about 1.4 million tons of carbon that's valued at $25 million. And it's also removing and continuously removing 42,000 tons of carbon per year. So it's time that we begin, please, to show some compassion for nature so we can also benefit. So this is really the time, COP26, that we can do this for our Earth. Moving from depleting to rebuilding fish stocks, from planting to protecting trees, from polluting to cleaning the air and water, from less dirty energy to more green, sustainable energy. Really move from competing to compassion. So that's what I hope to see.
Well, thank you so much, Blake. Great focus on the opportunity and the pointing out that we're actually part of the natural world, and you included loads of solutions there. And thank you for mentioning trees. As you know, I'm really
shout out for you.
Really pleased with trees. Just to make the point that it doesn't matter where in the world you plant the trees. It's great to plant them in New York. It's obviously a challenge because it's a city, but you can plant trees anywhere. And a great place to plant trees is where there are less people and where there has been deforestation. So, Leah, on to you, please.
Yeah, everyone's made it increasingly harder to follow up on. So I just want to thank you all for your contributions, because I think all of that is, yeah, so valid and so true. We are really at a turning point for our Earth, and I think, yeah, we're looking at world leaders, and I think they should really, really, really feel the pressure, because this is our future. It's the future of future generations. It's the future of the animals that we coexist on this planet with the whole habitat, the whole ecosystem. And to say it classically, there's no planet B, right? But I think there's so many issues that we need to focus on that it can seem overwhelming, whether that's for COP or whether that's globally. We look at biodiversity, we look at sort of how much people already around the world are affected by climate change. And I think what is really important for COP is to look at, well, how can we actually create this action plan? And something I've been really looking at also through what I study, climate law, is to look at, well, what is left to negotiate? What are some of the key negotiating points? There's several, but one of the main ones with regards to finalizing the Paris rulebook is the Article 6, which is all about market mechanisms. And that's sort of looking at, well, how and what market mechanisms, what financial measures can we put in place globally to support this transition, and to ensure that we're staying within the 1.5 degree target. So I think what we really need COP26 to be another Bretton Woods that completely transforms our world economy, but also because so much of our economic system does feed back into everything and how this world is run. And I think making sure that these mechanisms that are put into place are actually legitimate and are actually ensuring that change is happening, because there are a number of ways that they could be also not well placed, that they could be harmful to progressive action and to emission reduction, but there are a number of ways that they can really support the countries that will be ambitious towards climate action, that will be ambitious towards reducing their emissions. And that's what we need. And we need mechanisms that support those that are reducing emissions, but also those that are the most affected by climate change and have the least resources to do so. So I really, really ask for world leaders to take that into not only into consideration, but to take this as an action point and say, we are changing, we're really actually creating a system change for our future, and we're putting in place financial mechanisms to support that.
Thank you. System change for the future. Now, Gary's been with me on all 10 of these webinars. So Gary's got a great, building up a great knowledge of climate change as well. So Gary, you're a father of several children. So they've got I mean, they're younger than people here. So Gary, would you like to say a few words on your plea? Gary?
I'm an observer of people, and I'm inspired by you all. You can't just rustle up these emotions, and unless it was really important, we wouldn't feel this way. And I feel this way, even though I'm on Zoom and I'm across the Atlantic and miles away from you. I feel it, and I want to believe that politicians get into it for the right reason. And I want to believe that politicians want to leave a legacy. So my plea is to think beyond the electoral cycle, think beyond the economy, to have the generational thinking and unborn child thinking. And I think if they think like that and they leave their legacy, because otherwise they leave behind something that generations will not forgive them for.
Thanks, Gary. Legacy. Okay, so I don't want to miss this opportunity to say a few words myself, Gary. So if you can pop me on screen here. If you can put me on full screen, yeah?
You absolutely are on full screen.
Oh, okay. I can see you. I can mainly see you. Okay. So my message to world leaders, what does being a world leader mean? It means being a country leader, but it also means that you are being recognized for your role in leading the world. Now, we've all seen, particularly this year, we've seen across loads of parts of the world, we've seen the heat, the fires, the floods, the news about melting permafrost, and we can start to see the shape of what catastrophic climate change means. It means rising sea levels and potentially even billions of climate refugees, people who are displaced, losing their livelihoods. So at the end of the day, at COP26, you need to choose one of three numbers. It's very, very simple. 1.5 degrees, well below 2 degrees, or 2 degrees. There will be pressure for 2 degrees. Okay, so 1.5, scientists have said how important is 1.5 degrees max. It's safer for everybody. It reduces the risk of tipping points such as some methane from permafrost. And it's even lower cost overall, and the scientists say and know it can be done. So well below 2 degrees is what's in the Paris Agreement. This is a minimum, but the scientists are now saying is not sufficient. And what it means, the news this week, the president of the Maldives said that well below 2 degrees is actually means that his country in the Maldives goes underwater. Now, 2 degrees, it's going to come up inevitably as a compromise, but it actually breaks what was in the Paris Agreement that 190 countries have signed up to. So it's a non-starter. So it's unthinkable that we allow global warming to wreck our planet. Humanity has put people on the moon. Some countries have enough weapons to kill everyone in other countries many times over. But today, the situation is that we are not yet sufficiently organized to stop the enemy, which is now a threat to all 7.8 billion people on this earth and to all life on earth, which is global warming. No current world leaders surely will be in place in 2050, and most world leaders won't even be in place in 2030. So my ask to you, current world leaders at COP26, is simply this: to set the world on the right track, to make the right choice between the three numbers, to do the right thing for the world and choose 1.5, because to be a world leader means you need to be a true leader of the world and commit to 1.5 max and to commit to make it happen. Thank you. Okay, so
Charles, we also need to hear from Chandana.
oh, I'm so sorry. Oh my goodness. Chandana.
Oh, no worries. No worries, no worries.
So I'm so sorry. Chandana.
Oh yeah. So I don't know how to follow up on what you guys said, but I'll
Save the
make
best
it
to last.
Yeah. So first of all, I think the action that we can see from COP26 can be a testament to the pleas that we have had from the people all over, but it only can be as much as what the world leaders make it to be. So I really hope that they intend to do that for our sake, for the sake of our planet. But then lately, I mean, even with the change, the sea of change that we've seen with climate action, we still see governments and world leaders being neglected to climate change. But then we need stringent measures in every part of the world, especially because there's no excuse. We have seen strong evidence that shows that sustainability is the way forward. Investment in sustainability is the way forward for development of each nation. So there is really no excuse for all of these world leaders to not take action. But even though we are just 2 weeks away from COP26, we still see that I think around 49 countries have still not updated their NDCs. which is really sad, although we are in 2021 with the impact that we've seen coming from the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's quite sad to see that we still are in that state, but then I would remain hopeful that the world leaders still take some effort into making that change that we need at COP26. But while the world leaders make this change, I also urge them to make sure that the targets that they set are not only measurable, but are also something that can be monitored, because something that cannot be monitored, you cannot see what change you've made. So I think even with everybody reporting the kind of impact they're making, the positive impact they're making, and the climate neutral targets they're taking, none of us can know if it's not really measured. So and also monitored. So I think I really call for something that's standard, that's a standardized measure for people to know that whatever a country or a corporate company does is actually true to its fact. So I think that's what I'm calling for, is something that's measured and something that's monitored. So thank you.
Super. Okay, so thank you everybody for your pleas. Would anybody like to follow up with some comments and discussion on what anybody else has said?
Can I quickly comment on Shantana,
Sure.
your point about NDCs, because I think actually countries not sending in NDCs is technically a treaty breach, because because that's one of the mechanisms within the Paris Agreement that is like legally, well, under international law, legally binding. So yeah, I think it's frustrating to see, but I think it's also important that we kind of point that out, because obviously not all parts of the Paris Agreement are legally binding, but the submission of an NDC is, and it's also actually the fact that it needs to be ratcheted up, so that needs to be increased in ambition. And I think that's something that we really do need to also push for in years to come, to say, well, these national determined contributions, while there isn't a set target for each and every country should reach, they need to be higher than what they previously committed to. So yeah, I think that is a really interesting point. So thanks for raising that with the national determined contributions.
So do you think, Leah, do you think that there are any sanctions that can be applied if for this treaty breach?
Yeah, of course. And I think it should, something that if there are countries that are not willing to either submit or contribute to that global action, then it should be taken. And that's something that should be perhaps also then discussed at Paris, because if countries are not, and if we're being really honest, like the legal obligations of the Paris Agreement they should not be difficult to meet. It is literally submitting national determined contribution, for example, to say, oh, this is what we're doing. It doesn't even set out specifically the structure of how that's supposed to be, doesn't set a baseline where it's supposed to start. Obviously, it's supposed to look at that target of 1.5, maximum 2 degrees. But even so, that is the legally binding part, is just submitting something. And if countries are even unwilling to engage, they should be named and shamed and sanctioned for that.
Guys, isn't it great to have a lawyer on board telling everybody what they're supposed to be doing? Thanks, Leah. So any other comments, folks?
Yeah, I would just like to add, one of the things that all this conversation brings up is the idea of accountability, and how we need to continue to bolster the ways that we hold countries accountable. I think the language in the Paris Agreement is, look, it was the first international climate accord that was signed on by the amount of countries that it was. So you can't take that away from what it is. But in terms of legally binding, it's, we could go a step further, I think. So as lawyers and as policymakers, we need to ask ourselves, what is the best language to include, and how do we properly enforce sanctions, to get people to abide by the agreements?
Okay. So I'm going to ask people in a minute, we're getting towards the end, so we're going to ask people in a minute to summarize. But there's a really, really interesting question come up this week which is about Norway. So I do want to ask you folks this question. And so the situation which is on the BBC News is that the new government in Norway, centre-left government, has said it actually wants to grow the oil and gas industry. It also wants to, it's committed, it seems, to slashing net emissions by 55% by 2030. But of course, Europe's got a situation where it's massively dependent on gas from Russia. So the idea of getting more gas or whatever from Norway might be seen as attractive. But also, the Norway government has got I think it's the highest carbon tax in the world. It's talking about $230 per ton. And so at the moment, I think it's $60 per ton, planning to raise to $200 per ton in 2030. So this is a very tricky situation here with the various different pressures. So who would like to comment on what Europe and the world should be doing and saying to Norway about their plans?
I guess I can start first. I think it's an incredibly delicate situation. Like it's very tough to say, because as young people who are going to be at the forefront of the climate crisis in the future, we just want to say to them, what are you doing? Like stop exploiting these natural resources. But at the same time, Norway have proven themselves quite continuously as an environmental leader. You know, they send, I think it's the equivalent of $3 billion US towards the REDD plus. They're members of a lot of alliances for the environment. And this might be very controversial to say, but I think that if anyone was to extract fossil fuels, I know that Norway is a member of the Friends of Fossil Fuel Subsidy Reform. So it's almost like if anyone was meant to do it, then they could do it in a way that wouldn't harm the immediate area in which they would be extracting these fossil fuels. That said, obviously then the use of these fossil fuels is much greater and has a much bigger impact on the environment. And it's just a shame to see that a country that I looked at as a country that had great green priorities is actually coming back a little bit. And I think it's just a case of, I know that it's an economic case for them, that they know that they will be making more money out of it. They will be leading in competition against Russia. But in that case, we can just go back to what Blake said and say, where's the compassion then? You know, when are we going to stop this competition, and when will compassion hail over, I guess, petty politics, unfortunately?
Okay, so anybody else like to comment?
I'm not highly educated on the scenario at large, but I tend to believe that a country like Norway would do something like this because they believe it's probably the best best action at this moment in time for them. And so my thought would be, then how do we get them better alternatives collectively, to the point where they don't have to continuously rely on oil and natural gas to expand their economy or provide energy security for their citizens. And I understand with the technology booming in the renewable energy sector, we're seeing that come down the pipeline, but clearly they don't believe it's enough. So then going back to Deanna's point is asking, what do you need? Like what mix of tech or what energy mix do you need to see for you to not continue expanding? And then we can work collectively together to solve that problem.
I'm going to hang my head out of the window here and say I think it's absolutely unacceptable that they are pursuing that sort of extraction, because Norway is a country whose wealth has, primarily been accumulated through fossil fuel extraction. And I think it sends that continuous message, especially to developing countries who are like, well, we need this as well. If they're such a wealthy country, cannot make that switch and cannot say, oh, we're making that commitment, we're completely changing the way where our money comes from, but also a fossil fuel extraction, then how can we expect the rest of the world to do it? And I think Norway has a big responsibility to look at how can we counter sort of that damage that we've already caused through historic emissions and through what we've done. And I think, yes, it is politically difficult with regards to how internationally our political system is set up, with our dependency on each other with different energy sources, especially within Europe. But I think it's unacceptable, and I think it should be looked at and said, well, this shouldn't even be a discussion. This shouldn't even be a discussion point. And there's no grace that we should give countries that have the money and the resources to actually make that switch. But yeah.
I just want to quickly jump on that point where Blake talked about energy mix, and I'm also not very educated on this, but Norway produces 99% of their energy from hydropower, with very little percentage from wind and thermal. So I'm surprised that a country like
frozen.
Gary, we've lost.
That's okay. It's coming from a long way away.
Being politically one up from a nation, that just doesn't sit right with me. Like, you have the technology. Yeah, all I'm saying was, like, you have the technology, you have the resources, you have the money, you have an amazing solar exchange market in your country. You're one of the first people actually who can sell back the excess solar energy to the grid, who can trade solar energy within houses. So why would they decide to just go back to a negative energy like fossil fuels?
It does beg the question if this is really supposed to be kindness towards, oh, let's make sure our locally produced oil, or if it's really just money, if it's just really dollar signs again. And I think that's what is the red flags that are coming up here for me, especially with a country that in many ways, I mean, it has an amazing welfare system. There's so much things to look up to, and it should be a leader on climate and energy mix, because if not, then where can the world look up to if a country like Norway can't do it? I think.
So what they could do in that situation is almost, showcase to everyone, look, we're facing this issue with fossil fuels right now, but we've avoided it, we've overcome it, not go down this route, and actually showcase to the world there is another way out, and to basically emphasize everything that Leah said about it's unacceptable and we won't do it anymore. So hopefully they'll choose that option.
Yeah, it goes back to the earlier question though, of what are they measuring, right? And what do they care about? And if it's how to grow GDP, then
they won't listen right now.
Yeah, then this is an answer to that question.
I think they're focusing on economy because oil and gas seems to be their backbone, but
absolutely.
Hopefully there's a change.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for those answers. I think Gary, we're about timed out, so let's give everyone the opportunity to make a summary. So if you'd like to summarize your what you like to say. So Chandana, would you like to start?
Yeah, okay. So I think first of all, with COP26, I'm really hopeful, but at the same time very anxious about what the outcomes would be. But then I really hope that the world leaders make a conscious choice of what's required for the planet, and I'm looking forward to that.
Super, thank you. Hopeful and anxious. Blake, what about yourself?
Just time to show some compassion, please. That's all I want. I think a lot of what we've been discussing here would not be prevalent if that was the angle that our world leaders decided to take.
Great. Compassion. Thank you. Leah?
I think that follows probably well on from that to say that, we need to stop seeing ourselves as these little states that pretend to be floating on different planets where we're really just one planet. And I think we should really start pulling at one string together more, and start seeing different measures of not measure everything according to GDP GDP growth, because it's not a measure of how well the world population is doing at all, or of our health, or of our well-being, or of our happiness, or of our future. And I think it's actually quite criminal that the world keeps focusing on money, whereas really it's only benefiting the few at the cost of the many. And I think that's something that needs to change.
Great. I really like that point, that we're not separate countries floating on different planets. That's really, really good. Thank you for that. Shrishti?
Yeah, I'm going to be sitting on the edge of my seats for the next 4 weeks, tracking every news. But I just want to leave with this thought that I thought I should mention with us sitting here, and probably a lot of people who would be looking at the video later, is just one quote that 80% of our global biodiversity is managed and maintained by 5% of indigenous population. And I just want the world leaders, like Blake said, to have compassion, to recognize that these are the folks, these are the sects, these are the groups of people who have been for centuries managed our biodiversity. And in a span of 200 years, we've really destroyed a lot of it. So we must acknowledge, respect, and support the rights of the indigenous population who are only working for the planet. So please pick the planet, pick those people who are working for the planet. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Shrishti. This is such an important point that I think a lot of people don't know. So if I've got this right, what you're saying is that 80% of global biodiversity is managed by just 5% of the population, which is indigenous people. Thank you. Okay, last words, Deanna, over to you.
So I think I'll just finish with, over the last couple of years, the world has faced just incredible crisis after another crisis. And in those times, humanity have prevailed. I mean, the amount of countries working together right now on multiple COVID vaccines. Russia last week sent a film crew into space, and it kind of just goes to show humanity is doing some really great things right now. So when is this great going to apply to the environment? When can we really walk away and say, wow, we have really just achieved something incredible? And hopefully COP26 will fuel that.
Okay, Gary, do you want to say a few words?
I'm quite speechless, really, when I think that these young, brilliant minds, I feel quite confident that we can change things. I feel that we can make a difference. I'm forever an optimist, Charles. How do you feel?
I'm just blown away at these amazing arguments that everyone today has come up with. I think it's just so powerful, and I really hope that some people in positions of decision making will listen to these pleas and will feel moved to do something about it. What each of you has said has been just so powerful. In terms of today, big thank you to everybody. Big thank you to the audience. I'm sorry we didn't get time for any questions from the audience. As I said at the beginning, this event, everyone's volunteered for this. If anybody feels motivated to take some action, then do please plant some trees with no CO2. It's very easy. As I say, for a donation of just £20, we'll plant 180 trees. £30 we'll plant 270 trees. And Blake and New York City have planted 1 million trees, so we do need a lot of trees. So if anybody wants to contribute towards 1 million trees, the world needs 1 trillion trees. So we've got a little bit of a way to go, but with the right movements from COP26, then absolutely the whole world can change gear and make it all happen. So thank you very much to everybody. And we'll talk again after COP26.
I feel we've made a difference. So everyone can take a big, deep breath. We're about to stop the live audience and then maybe even network with each other. So I'm stopping.